So we tell you all year who we think you should draft and who we want to draft, but who actually ends up on our teams. Got the answer for that right after this on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Fantrax. We're at the end of the first full week of regularly scheduled programming, which means it's me, Erik Halterman, here with Ryan Boyer on what will become the waiver wire episode, but no pickups just yet. We've got other plans for February and March. Ryan, I think this is the last podcast on this channel before the Super Bowl, so any big game takes you want to get out there that will immediately be wrong?
Not really. I hope the Chiefs don't win just because we've seen enough of that, I feel. But beyond that, not really.
Fair enough. I'm utterly incapable of giving you actual analysis on this game as an Eagles fan. I think we're going to win 1,000,000-1, and I also think we're going to lose by one score on a controversial call, a gift from the refs in the last play of the game. So one of those things will probably come true. I'm mostly just nervous, stressed at this point. I still think that Tom Brady is going to lead a comeback in that Super Bowl that the Eagles won over him 6 or 7 years ago. I'm still not fully accepting the fact that we actually beat Tom Brady. So maybe the Eagles will beat Patrick Mahomes as well, but I don't know.
Well, it's really a win-win for you because either the Eagles are going to win or the Chiefs are going to win, and you get to complain about how it was rigged and the officials wanted the Chiefs to win. So either way, exactly. Erik comes out a winner.
Yeah, in other Chiefs Super Bowl wins, I've at least gotten to say, hey, Andy Reid gets another win. Good for him. Go Eagles. But not this week. Maybe Eagles fan Taylor Swift will be happy either way. Maybe she'll pull out a Eagles jersey from under her Travis Kelce jersey and celebrate with Jalen Hurts on the field after the game. That's the big prediction. But should we move beyond the world of Taylor Swift and football into the baseball that people are probably here for? Our main topic for the day is the players that are actually ending up on our teams. We've got 5 hitters and 5 pitchers apiece. I think we could also call this topic our favorite mid-round players because that's the region of the draft these guys tend to find themselves in. It's rare that one of your most drafted players falls in the 2nd or 3rd round unless you keep finding yourself in the same region of the draft. And we'll get to that in a minute. Just wanted to cover a few headlines. There's not necessarily a lot this time of year since we're doing daily shows. There's not necessarily daily news. You can listen back to Todd and Clay yesterday or me and Jason Collette on Thursday. But we did get an update, I guess, about the Yoan Moncada signing with the Angels. He's probably starting over Anthony Rendon. All right, so maybe we do actually want to have some interest in him. We also got Jason Hayward just signing with the Padres. Looks like he could probably fill the large side of a platoon. If you have to take a late round chance on either of these guys, either of them interesting at all, Yoan Moncada or Jason Hayward?
Beyond single league formats, I don't think so. Hayward was pretty good with the Astros down the stretch last year after flaming out with the Dodgers, and like you said, it does sound like he's going to be on the long side of a platoon with Connor Joe. I think I'd actually rather see Connor Joe get more plate appearances. Not that he's terribly exciting himself, but yeah, beyond single league formats, not really. Yoan Moncada seemed like a very Angels signing. Maybe they can squeeze a little more out of him. Maybe he can stay healthy, but probably just as likely that Anthony Rendon does. And the chances of that are, as we know, very, very slim. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to get regular run, it looks like. So that's enough in and of itself to give him some single league appeal. But mixed formats, I'm pretty far out on all those guys.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't think many people are going to be very interested in any of those players. One more bit of news before we get on to the main topic. We had Xavier Edwards claiming that he wants to steal 60 bases this season. Now, okay, we don't need to put a ton of stock into his words, but when it comes to steals, we do know that players' intention is a large part of the puzzle there. It's a combination of speed, getting on base, and deciding to actually do it. So sounds like he's got that last part down. Are you into Xavier Edwards as a tons of steals, great batting average, and nothing else type of player?
Yeah, players want to steal more bases. Managers are planning to be more aggressive on the base paths. Everybody's in the best shape of their life. It's that time of the year. But yeah, I mean, Edwards stole 31, something like that, bases, and basically the equivalent of a half a season. So just projecting that out, it's probably reasonable enough to think that that's within the realm of possibility if he is able to stay healthy. I know he's had some shoulder issues the last couple of years. He changed how he worked out and strengthened that shoulder over the offseason. So hopefully that helps him stay on the field. And I mean, if he stays healthy, he's a pretty interesting, at least from a steals and batting average perspective. He offers some of the very weakest power of any regular in the game, I would say, but you're going into your draft not expecting any pop from Xavier Edwards. But, like I said, this time of the year, often players will proclaim their goals of reaching a certain plateau. It seems like it's usually speed. You don't hear a lot of guys saying, I'm going to hit 40 home runs this year. It's
right.
So I want to run more. I want to steal more bases. And stolen bases aren't as difficult to come by as they were a couple of years ago. So a guy like Edwards, who's, I guess, really a two-category specialist, maybe he's going to score a decent number of runs. He'll probably hit leadoff, but that's going to be a really bad lineup in Miami. So that's a big stolen base guy like that is not much of a difference maker as he would have been a couple of years ago, but 60 stolen bases is 60 stolen bases. And I do think it's within his range of outcomes.
Yeah, I don't think it would be that hard for him to reach at all. I noticed the projections, even though they're projecting him for about 135 games, they tend to be calling for 31 to 37 steals. ATC looks like they're on the high end at 37 there. I would take the over on those. He basically reached that number in half a season, like you said. Probably he'll reach base a little bit less than 397 like he did last year, and probably he'll regress in some ways. So maybe he won't literally double his numbers, but I could definitely see him getting close. And he goes late enough in the draft that you should know by then, are you ahead in average and steals? Well, then you have no interest in Xavier Edwards. But if you're behind, yeah, I think he should go on someone's team, certainly, and maybe it should be yours. Let's take one question from the chat here before we move on to the main topic. We've got this question from Joseph Nelson saying, do you see any rookie starting pitcher breaking camp, making the opening day roster? Now, we don't have any rookie starting pitchers, just double checking on the list today. It's a little bit tougher maybe this time of year. This is right before we actually start getting the word from teams, but just looking at some of the guys, well, Roki Sasaki, he'll be breaking camp if he counts.
Yeah.
Some other names, Jackson Jobe in Detroit, Bubba Chandler in Pittsburgh, Kumar Rocker, I guess we assume he'll probably break camp with the Rangers. Andrew Painter, we know that he won't with the Phillies. They're slow playing him. He may not even throw any innings this spring. Are you taking a shot at any of those top guys yet?
Yeah, we can weave that into the question from Manuel Perez, who asked about Kobe Mayo or Bubba Chandler and his dynasty talk.
Yeah, I think
Bubba Chandler's got a really good shot to break camp in the Pirates rotation. He's pretty built up already from an innings workload perspective. I know we saw them send Paul Skeens to the minors for a while, even though he didn't really need to, but that was wanting to get him on a regular schedule. At least that was the reason they gave. They don't really need to do that with Bubba Chandler. There's a clear opening in the rotation for him. And I mean, he was really, really good last year, really good down the stretch. And doesn't have major workload concerns. So I think that he's also the type of guy could have a couple dominant spring starts and his ADP is going to rise, and it's going to look like he has even better chance to break camp in the rotation. So I like Bubba Chandler a lot. Some of the other guys you mentioned, Kumar Rocker, I guess he's probably a pretty good chance he's going to break camp in the Rangers rotation. Got to look at him down the stretch. I think I do like Bubba Chandler the most out of that group, though.
Yeah, I double checked that trade on our dynasty rankings run by James Anderson, and we would be taking the Bubba Chandler side of that deal, not by a huge amount. There are probably some league settings where maybe you'd look for Mayo, but the Chandler side looks good to me as well. Let's move to the main topic of the day then, which is the players that you and I, Ryan, are actually drafting, who is actually ending up on our teams, who are not just players that we are telling you to draft, and then we're failing to actually pull the plug on ourselves. So the first hitter you've got here is one that I like as well, Jordan Westburg. He's got some doubters, I would say, but a decent number of fans, and you and I are both among them. So what specifically about Westburg appeals to you this year?
Yeah, really good showing in his rookie year. 18 home runs, 26 doubles in 107 games. Missed some time down the stretch with a broken hand, held down those counting stats a little bit, but in his batted ball metrics, kind of said he should have been even better than he was. His expected WOBA was higher than his actual WOBA. Hard hit rate in the 77th percentile, EV in the 80th percentile, barrel rate in the 80th percentile. Only stole 6 bases, but he did rank in the 91st percentile in sprint speed. So, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of wanting to steal bases is kind of intent and wanting to be aggressive. And it seems like he has it in his toolbox to steal more bases if he wants to. Wouldn't count on, more than 12 to 15, but even that would be a pretty big help. And as we know, Camden Yards bringing in those left field fences, much to the delight of right-handed hitters in the Orioles lineup, of which Jordan Westburg is. So that's a nice little uptick for him as well. Going inside the top 100 picks, so he's not cheap necessarily, but I think there's definitely still room for profit with Jordan Westburg at that rate.
Yeah, I am a fan as well. I see a young player on a good team and a good lineup who does some of everything, and I see little reason to doubt that he's not going to do some of everything again next year. Slightly better than average strikeout rate combined with a barrel rate just shy of 12%. That'll certainly play. I guess the only real negative I see in his stat line is a low walk rate, and maybe that's indicative of maybe pitchers can get him to chase and they're going to drive that strikeout rate up in the future or something, but not a lot to complain about so far. The only other possible concern with Westburg is we know the Orioles have a crowded depth chart. They're not going to be able to play everyone every day. And so if Westburg has a bad April, then maybe is he going to be losing playing time to Kobe Mayo, who we briefly mentioned earlier, or are the Orioles going to shuffle things around in a way that sees, Jackson Holliday taking his playing time? Or do you think there's room for everybody? How do you think that all shakes out in Baltimore?
I'm not overly concerned. It is a crowded depth chart. I think I would be more concerned about Jackson Holliday getting demoted, just because we saw that he maybe wasn't quite ready for the big leagues last season. Westburg projected to play at third base, but conceivably he could slide over to second and they could put Mayo at third if Holliday gets off to a brutal start. I think that's a more likely scenario. I think Westburg is definitely got staying power, or powder, either one.
Yeah, I'm not sure what staying powder is. Sounds illegal, but if it isn't, I hope he's got an ample supply. I think he'll be in the lineup plenty this year, but I do want to point out that of all the possible top 100 picks, he does have more risk of slipping into a 4 or 5 days a week role than pretty much anybody else. But again, I'm with you. I don't think that's going to happen. My top hitter here, Luis Garcia Jr. is somebody I keep ending up with. Part of it might be second base is kind of a weird position, not the strongest. If you see somebody you like in those middle rounds and you can get it out of the way before dealing with a late round second baseman, if you missed, well, there aren't many early guys. Jordan Westburg, one of them. It's a spot where you might just want to take a guy when there's a whole bunch of similar players in these middle rounds. Maybe take the second baseman. That's been my logic, and I've landed on Garcia a lot. He is a player who doesn't have very good career numbers, but that's because he spent parts of 4 years as a bad major leaguer when he should have still been in the minors. He was not until age 24 did he break out, but that was his 5th shot at the majors. If we had a player who was just putting up pretty decent numbers in the minors until his age 24 season, and then he did what he did last year, which was 18 homers, 22 steals, and a 282 average, we'd be quite excited. I think there are some worries here about maybe his ability to hit lefties. He could potentially get platooned, and so maybe that stops him from taking another step forward. But it was a 282 average that he pretty much deserved. His expected batting average was 278. So if he just does that again with close to a 2020 season, it's already good enough. And I think there is potential for more with a guy with his youth. So are you a Luis Garcia Jr. fan, or are you seeing the downsides more than I am?
I see the downsides a little more, I think, just because I don't trust Davey Martinez to play him against lefties. I mean, he was using Ildemaro Vargas at second base against lefties a lot last year. I think he's looking for any excuse to platoon if he can. Also a little worried about the stolen bases. The stolen base total from him last year kind of came out of nowhere, and he's not particularly fast. The Nationals ran a ton, and they turned Jesse Winker into a guy who actually stole bases, if you recall. Will they keep that up again in this season? But I remember looking up just their stats from a stolen base perspective and efficiency, and they were not very efficient at all. So maybe they cut back on just running generally as a team, being as aggressive as they were last year. And if they do that, Garcia seems like a candidate to be seeing his stolen bases cut fairly dramatically. So a little worried about that, but I like the pure hitting ability from Garcia, especially against righties. Don't know if I'll be jumping in at that ADP necessarily. He's just inside the top 120 in NFBC drafts. I think there's enough of concern where I might pass on him at that rate, but there's still more to like than not like with Garcia.
Yeah, fair enough. I just want to circle back on that point about the Nationals running. We talked a lot about how much they ran like crazy last year, even with players who shouldn't, like Jesse Winker, like Luis Garcia. Do we think that was the team's strategy, and that the Nationals are a team that run a lot and there's no reason to believe that's about to change? Or do you think that was more likely to be a 1-year experiment, under these new rules, the team saying, we're not going to be very good this year, so let's see what happens if we run a ton. And now they're maybe going to start the year intending to contend, and maybe they won't do quite as much. Do you think that there's a real risk that they jump from one of the top steals teams to, middle of the pack? Or do you think that very likely they've showed us what they want to do, they're going to do it again?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, they weren't very efficient last year, so maybe that's the reasoning they can give to kind of dial back on the aggressiveness. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to find that out until the season gets going. I don't know if Davey Martinez is going to say anything during spring training about maybe dialing back the aggressiveness or continuing to kind of have his foot on the gas. I do think it's something to keep in mind that they could potentially dial it back. And if they do, Garcia is probably one of those guys that's going to be a victim of that. So just something to keep in mind. I don't know. It's hard. It's difficult to say how much you should weigh that, though, when you're considering drafting Garcia.
Fair enough. I do think we might find out something just from their takeoff rates in spring training. I think that tends to tell you at
Yeah.
least a little bit of something. I think we saw hints that this was coming. I remember Jason Collette talking about that. I believe it's the sort of thing he tends to write about in his spring articles. I believe that he discussed that. So if we see the Nationals run less, then I think you might be onto something. That might be a prediction of what's coming in the regular season. Let's get on to your next guy on the list here. Josh Lowe, coming off a down year, but you're buying back in. Why is that?
Yeah, speaking of running, a guy who's very good at stealing bases and doing so efficiently. It never really seemed like Josh Lowe was totally healthy. Last year, dealt with hip, oblique, hamstring issues, wound up playing in just 106 games, and the rate stats really weren't good at all, but still hit 10 home runs, went 25 for 26 in stolen base attempts over those 106 games. Pretty good from a counting stats perspective there. He also hit the ball harder last year, 46.1% hard hit rate, 90.8 miles per hour exit velocity, got his barrel rate up over 10%. And the big thing, I feel like just Rays hitters in general, we're probably underestimating how much they're going to benefit from this move to George Steinbrenner Field. Not only does it have the same dimensions as Yankee Stadium, which is going to have that short porch in right field, but you're also dealing with the Florida heat, the Florida humidity should help offense. And it's also just getting away from Tropicana Field. We've seen plenty of Rays hitters that are much better on the road than they were at Tropicana Field. Willy Adames was really one that I remember in recent years that stuck out in that regard. Some players complained about the batting eye not being great there, which is kind of weird. You would think if you're playing in a stadium like that, the least you could do like a sterile environment like Tropicana Field, you could get the batting eye right, but
yeah,
apparently they were not able to really do that. So just a lot working in Josh Lowe's favor in that regard with the ballpark shift. And he's going to steal a ton of bases regardless. Like I said, he's always been super efficient in that regard. He's a fast guy, always has stolen bases at every level. And I think the power could take a jump as well, especially at home. And, we're looking at ADP 165. I think getting him after 150th pick is a pretty good spot.
Yeah, 25 for 26 on the base pass last year in just 106 games. So definitely going to steal plenty. And if his numbers at the plate get even halfway back to where they were the year before, I think he's going to pay off quite well. Probably somebody I should be targeting more than I have. I don't know if I've landed him yet. I've got an outfielder here up next, Riley Greene. Not the only time you're going to hear the name Greene today, I think. But Riley Greene is somebody I'm a fan of going pick 113 in February NFBC drafts. He is still quite young. He's 24 years old, but he's already good, and he was supposed to be great. I mean, what more could you want for a guy who's still outside the top 100? Last year, hit 262 with 24 homers in 137 games. Strong barrel rate of 13%. A few too many strikeouts, 27% strikeout rate, but that's not a massive problem here for Riley Greene. He's just a fairly well-rounded player, or maybe he's just a power bat. Still not totally sure. He had a respectable enough 7 steals in 99 games 2 years ago, just 4 last year. So I still think there's a chance that he's a 30-10 kind of guy. But really, it's just the point he is in his career. This is the type of guy I want to be taking chances on, similar to Luis Garcia, similar age, where they're young and they've already shown something. With Greene, I guess he dealt with some injuries right as he was coming onto the scene, and that probably slowed the excitement for him. I think if he had hit the ground running after being, the number one prospect in baseball in some places, I think people would be a lot more excited about him in general by now, and he'd be inside the top 100. Some durability concerns that he missed some time with a hamstring last year, and like I said, the year before that, he only played 99 games, so there's a bit of a worry there, but if you can get him outside the top 100, I really think a guy with his talent and his youth, that's the type of player who could be going 3, 4, 5 rounds earlier next year. Do you buy that? Do you think there's big upside still with Riley Greene?
Yeah, I think so. And I do think that, I mean, the sprint speed wasn't great last year. He did steal more bases in the minors on occasion. I think he could at least get up to the double digits. That would be helpful. You've got that built-in Comerica Park disadvantage. A left-handed hitter is just not an ideal spot to be in, but I mean, he didn't really have splits last year. His OPS was virtually the same at home and on the road. Hit a few more home runs on the road than he did at home, but not dramatically. So yeah, I'm a Riley Greene fan. Gonna go ahead and move into my next guy, also an outfielder. Brandon Nimmo kind of had a power breakout in 2023 in that those gains stuck in 2024, hit 23 home runs, 47.4% hard hit rate, 91.9 miles per hour exit velocity, barrel rate up over 9%. Also went 15 for 15 on the base pass, which is not something we had seen from Brandon Nimmo in the past. He's always been fairly fast, but just wasn't much of a base stealer. Only hit 224 last year, but hit 278 over the 4 years prior to that. That just screams fluke to me that the average is gonna come back up in 2025. Pete Alonso is back with the Mets, which means Nimmo probably going to move down at least one lineup spot, but it also means that the Mets lineup is just going to be better. So I think it's probably a benefit for him overall. My biggest worry with Nimmo is that we heard either earlier this month, maybe late January, the plantar fasciitis is still an issue for him. He's not able to sprint yet. As we've learned from a guy like Carlos Correa, who we're going to talk about in a little bit as well, that can be a nagging issue that's difficult to kick. It never kept Nimmo from not playing last year, but did it hinder him at all? It's tough to say. I mean, obviously, we mentioned that he went 15 for 15 on the bases. Maybe he dials that back if the foot is bothering him. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think at the very least, he's going to be really valuable in 4 categories, and getting him outside the top 150 picks, I think it's a pretty good spot for Brandon Nimmo, even with the injury risk.
Yeah, some durability and age-related concerns, certainly, but the price isn't crazy. It's dropping since the news of that plantar fasciitis. I think he's in the 160s if you look overall NFBC ADP, but if you look at just in February, it looks like he's in the 190s. Although he actually had been remarkably durable in recent seasons. In my head, he's very fragile, is constantly on the IL. If you look at his first 6 major league seasons, he only once reached 100 games. Granted, there's the COVID season and his debut season in there, but still, he very regularly came up well short of a full season. But 3 straight years with at least 150 games. If we get positive news about that plantar fasciitis and he looks like less of an injury risk, then I think he'll look like quite a steal. I've got another outfielder here, and I think this is one you can get behind. I believe you may have covered him in an article earlier this offseason. Garrett Mitchell. He is really a fantasy player in a lot of ways. He's got power, and he's got speed, and he's got batting average questions. There's a whole lot of interesting fantasy sleepers that look exactly like that. And at the part of the draft, you can get Garrett Mitchell around pick 225. I'm willing to put up with what was a 32% strikeout rate last year in 69 games. We haven't seen a lot of Garrett Mitchell yet. He's still young and has had some injuries, but the pieces are there. It's a 9.5% barrel rate in 116 games for his career. He's got 13 homers and 20 steals over that stretch. So if there's enough playing time there, maybe he's not going to play against lefties, although maybe that'll keep his batting average from being terrible. I think he's got the power and speed, And I think that the average is going to be bad, but not bad enough that it's going to cancel out the power and speed that Garrett Mitchell gives you. I think you got an outfielder who plays defense. It's going to be in there a lot. It's going to run. It's not too dissimilar from Josh Lowe to me. Could you get behind my Garrett Mitchell pick here?
Yeah, and he's going so late after, pick 250. Hits the ball on the ground a lot. His ground ball rate was up over 50% last year. So that you'd like to see that raise go up a little bit, take advantage of a pretty favorable home environment. But I'm with you that he's gonna run plenty. He's got the speed and he's got the stolen base pedigree. I do think there's a potential for a little more power there if he can get the ball off the ground. Probably not going to play a ton against lefties. They do have some other options there, but I do think he can do enough damage against righties that he's certainly can pay off where he's going ADP wise. Another guy,
veteran here.
Yeah, Jurickson Profar, my next guy. Can we call it a mid-career breakout, late career breakout? He's about to turn 32.
It's like his 17th season in the league or whatever.
Yeah, he's been around forever, but he's just now going to turn 32 later this month. So I guess that's mid-career. But yeah, really good season from Jurickson Profar. He added a leg kick over the offseason, opened up his stance, and 24 home runs, 85 RBI, 94 runs, 280 average were all career highs. He's never been a guy who's hit the ball hard, but that new approach at the plate really paid dividends, went up to a 44.4% hard hit rate. That was up more than 10% over his previous career high. 91.1 miles per hour exit velocity. It had never been higher than 87.5 miles per hour before. And the good news is he was able to hit the ball harder without sacrificing anything in the way of plate discipline. That remained elite last year. And now he's going to very good Braves lineup. At least we think it's going to be very good. It wasn't as good as we anticipated last year. But should be a good Braves lineup. He's going to a better park to hit in. I know it's natural to have some doubts about mid to late career breakouts like this. I think that's fair, but I look at the data and I see nothing to believe that Jurickson Profar can't repeat this. Maybe he shows up to spring training and he doesn't, that leg kick and open stance isn't clicking like it was last year, but I don't know. I'm not seeing anything in the data to think that this could be a flukish one year thing. And he's still going pretty late in drafts for a guy that was as good as he was last year. He's going outside the top 200, and his ADP has not gone up really at all since he signed with the Braves. You automatically see guys who linger on the free agent market for a while, their prices to go down a bit, and it naturally goes up once they sign somewhere. But his is really unchanged since he landed in Atlanta, and I'm definitely going to take advantage of that price, and already have in drafts so far.
Yeah, gotta love anybody who goes to Atlanta because they will never get a day off. They just don't do the thing that everybody else in the league does these days, where you give 1 day off a week to this guy and that guy and that guy, and they rotate guys through different positions. They just
Brian Snitker is not familiar with the load management term.
Exactly. So hey, if you're looking for somebody who might get 700 plate appearances nearly, it could be Jurickson Profar. I think he's going to be great for NL only leagues because he's not going to be exciting, but he's going to be in the lineup and he's going to be fine. And that's exactly the type of player you need in those leagues. My next guy here, Carlos Correa. I keep ending up with him as a middle infielder or maybe a very late shortstop. He's somebody who I think, is he getting over penalized for his durability issues, or are people just forgetting how good he is? I just don't think that a player his talented should ever be going this far outside the top 200. I don't know what's going on here. I know that Carlos Correa has his issues staying healthy. He only played 86 games last year. Hasn't played 150 games since 2016. but he was, over 135 for 3 years before last year. So it's not as if he's Mike Trout levels of injury risk here. And unlike some other players who get hurt a lot, he's not getting worse. Most players who fall this far down in the draft who were really good last decade and who are hurt all the time, well, they're also not very good now. And that's why they're this late. And you pick them as a late dart throw, hoping that they're both going to get healthy and get good again. Well, you don't have to hope for that with Correa. He was excellent last year, a 155 WRC plus. It was his career best strikeout rate, 16.6%. Barrel rate of 9.1% is right in line with his career norms. He is basically the same Carlos Correa we've ever seen. Hit 310, 388, 517, 14 homers in 86 games. That's an excellent hitter. And yes, there's durability questions. And yes, he doesn't run. But you don't actually need your shortstop to run. You just need steals on your team. As long as you have enough steals from other positions, maybe all it really takes is drafting one guy early who gets 20 more steals than most other players, and then you're probably okay. I think Carlos Correa is being way too heavily penalized for his durability issues, and maybe it's going to come back to bite me, and he's going to go down in spring training and miss the whole year. But if that doesn't happen, you're getting way better quality at-bats than you're going to get from anybody else in this range of the draft. So what am I missing here?
Yeah, I struggle a little with Correa because in the plantar fasciitis stuff cropped up in 2023. And while he didn't miss a ton of time that year, he really wasn't good offensively. And then last year, he was very good offensively, but he missed a lot of time. So he needs to find I don't know if it's a happy medium is the right term, but just stay on the field. And if we can get the best of both worlds from the last 2 years, that would be perfect. I don't know. I think I don't want to say fair, the discount that has been applied, the injury risk with him. But like you said, the guys that are going around him, though, I mean, he really doesn't have much of a performance question. Is he going to be able to stay on the field is the real question. But I mean, 3 out of the last 4 years, as you mentioned, he basically has stayed on the field, and 3 of the last 4 years, he's been very good offensively. So maybe I need to come around more on Carlos Correa than I have been so far.
It's outside the top 200. Yeah. It's such an easy risk to take. It's just not going to hurt you.
He's very, very cheap. That's for sure.
You've got another middle infielder in the same range.
Yeah, another Tampa Bay Ray and another Lowe/Lowe, going with Brandon Lowe, and all the stuff I said about the new ballpark with Josh Lowe obviously applies the same way to Brandon Lowe, and he could benefit even more. He's more of a fly ball hitter than Josh Lowe. He's much more of a pull hitter than Josh Lowe, and he's also already done it before. From a power perspective, I mean, he had that 39 home run season. He's hit, I think, 21 each of the last 2 seasons, and basically like 3/4 of a equivalent of a season. And has always hit the ball very hard. Barrel rate has never been below 10.3% in his career. It was at 12.4% last year. He also didn't platoon nearly as much as we'd come accustomed to down the stretch last year, and he did fine against lefties. I know when you're talking about Rays players and talking yourself into maybe this guy isn't going to platoon is probably not a very smart strategy, because that's just what the Rays do. And I do think especially when Ha-Seong Kim gets healthy, they will have more options, and Jose Caballero can play second base against lefties when Kim gets healthy. So maybe that's a platoon option for Brandon Lowe. But I mean, I think he showed enough against lefties that maybe he could avoid that, or at least not be an automatic bench against southpaws. And even if he's not, I think the ballpark upgrade could be enough for him to pay off pretty handsomely at an ADP of I'm looking at 236 in NFBC drafts. He has had back issues in the past, but those didn't really come up last year. Maybe those are behind him. Maybe they're not. But I think there's much more positive going for Brandon Lowe at that, especially at that price point, than there is negative.
Yeah, Lowe has only once in his career reached 450 plate appearances, but when he did, he hit 39 homers back in 2021. That's the level of talent we're talking about here with that park upgrade as well. If the health cooperates, it could be quite a good season for Brandon Lowe. The final hitter we're going to talk about today is Jo Adell. I still don't know how I feel about that, but he keeps ending up on my teams. Jo Adell, not a great baseball player from a real world perspective. He was worth 0.1 WAR, according to Fantrax last year. That brought him up to negative 1.1 for his career. So still some work to do. He only hit 207 with a 280 on base percentage last season. But because he was in the lineup quite a lot, well, he actually only got to 451 plate appearances because he dealt with some injuries at the end. But for most of the season, he was a compiler and a very fantasy-friendly one. 20 homers and 15 steals in those 451 plate appearances. And if you look at that horrible batting average, 207, that was an underachievement. The expected batting average of 224 isn't good. But Adell did bring his strikeout rate down to 28%, which, man, the amount of caveats that I've given in this paragraph are ridiculous. But 28% is not good, but it's a lot better than what we're used to seeing from Jo Adell, who's been in the high 30s or even over 40% before. So this is also somebody who's still pretty young. He's still 25 years old, doesn't turn 26 until April. He's somebody who was supposed to be a huge prospect. I have given up hope that he's going to be the player he's supposed to be, but that does still matter to me, given that he's still fairly young. The tools, the athleticism, the potential's all still there. I don't think he's going to make good on much of it, but we just saw last year that he doesn't really have to on a team like the Angels, where there's just not much competition for at-bats. They're willing to run. It's just an incredibly fantasy-friendly situation for a player who has that power and the speed that fantasy players want in roto formats. Just don't look at his WAR, because you don't have to. We don't play a WAR league. Are you willing to draft Jo Adell, or do you think that low WAR is telling us something, and that he's probably not a major leaguer for more than a couple more months?
Yeah, I mean it's all about the price point for me. Like, if you're in a 5 outfielder league, and I mean he's not even being drafted in some 5 outfielder leagues. That's how late he's going, and I see no reason to believe he can't at least repeat 20 home runs and 15 stolen bases like he did last year. And where he's going, that's enough right there to pay off what you're going to invest in him. And he actually improved dramatically defensively, so that gives him some kind of playing time cover there, even if you didn't already have enough being on the Angels and being on a team with Mike Trout, who's unfortunately, we're just going to wait for him to get injured again. But playing time is not going to be a concern with Jo Adell, I don't think, even if he goes through slumps, which he inevitably will. And he's probably only going to be a 2-category contributor, really. But again, at that price point, that's perfectly fine.
All right, we're going to move on to the pitchers we keep drafting right after these messages from our sponsors, starting with Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. I am currently in the middle of a dynasty draft on Fantrax, and I think it's my turn to pick, and I'm holding everybody up. Sorry about that. Coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring system, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more, and it's all free. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/rotowire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. We're also brought to you by Edge Boost. Have you ever had your debit card declined or had to call your bank at 3 a.m. in Vegas? Edge Boost is the first customer-facing online bank dedicated to the gaming industry. There are numerous benefits to using Edge Boost. $250,000 cash per day in debit, or $250,000 per day in debit deposits, unlimited withdrawals, cash back on sports betting, DFS sweeps, 100% approval for all gaming activity, financial segmentation for discretion and responsible gaming, compatible today for prediction markets, iCasino, DFS, sports betting, lottery, brick-and-mortar casinos, horse racing, and sweeps. No transaction reviews or account freezes. Visit edgeboost.bet today and use promo code ROTOPOD. That's promo code ROTOPOD. And we're back here on the Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast presented by Fantrax. I'm Erik Halterman here with Ryan Boyer, and we've been going over the players we keep drafting. We're about to get on to our pitchers, although I do want to throw this question from the chat here. Willie Castro or Cristopher Merrill? I just got to get some Cristopher Merrill talk in this spring. I haven't said anything about him this year after being rather shamed by what he did last season. It did not turn out the way I hoped. He looked like he was taking the right steps, at least according to the underlying numbers with the Cubs. The results weren't there. And then he moved to the Rays and the underlying numbers disappeared. And so I haven't been a Cristopher Merrill drafter this year, even though I still like the theoretical player. Any Ray who is less than a sure thing, I worry that he's going to play twice a week. So I haven't gone there. Can't say I'm a big Willie Castro fan either, though. Who would you take of that pairing, Ryan?
It's funny because I wasn't really a Merrill guy last year. And now that he's had a bad season, I've find myself wanting him more because I'm not sure the profile of Cristopher Merrill has really changed all that much. And he's going way later in drafts, understandably, because he didn't have a great year. I guess maybe I should be weighing the Rays thing more heavily in that he could find himself on the bench or at least platooned. But I still see a guy who hits for a ton of power. He can steal some bases. He's eligible at multiple positions. And as we mentioned, he's going to go to a much more fantasy-friendly home park. So I think I'm going to buy back in on Cristopher Merrill. I would definitely take him over Willie Castro, who didn't run nearly as much last year, and that kind of limits his appeal, although that's, at least eligible at 5 positions, something like that is very handy to have, but I'm leaning towards Cristopher Merrill.
All right. Well, I hope you're right. I wouldn't mind missing all of the fun on Cristopher Merrill. If he gets to have a good season, my Cristopher Merrill jersey will be worth wearing again. Let's go to the pitchers, where your first guy would also be my first guy, but I'm going to give him to you. Hunter Greene. We're both big fans. Are we about to cry together in April when his arm blows up?
Oh, gosh, I hope not. It's the injury concern is definitely there. He missed time with injuries in each of his years in the big leagues. Dealt with an elbow issue down the stretch last year, but he did finish the year healthy and really took a step forward in terms of his four-seamer last year. He changed his release point, and that really made that pitch play up. He went from, if you look at Baseball Savant's run value metric, he went from -12 with the four-seamer to +20, all the way up to the second best four-seamer in baseball in that regard. And the slider remained very effective for Greene. He also added a splitter, which he didn't throw a ton. I think it was a little under 10% as far as his usage goes, but it was really, really good when he did throw it. It had resulted in a 215 expected WOBA. That was the best of any of his pitches. So if he finds that legitimate third weapon and the gains with the fastball stick, I mean, we're talking about a ceiling of one of the best pitchers in baseball. There is injury concern there. He's obviously got the built-in disadvantage of Great American Ballpark, but with that improvement with the four-seamer also came him not necessarily solving those home run issues, but certainly keeping them at bay much more than he did in 2023. So I really have no performance concerns with Greene. I think it's just about him being able to stay healthy. And if he does, he's going to well pay off that ADP, which is just barely in the top 100. You're on mute, Erik.
Oh. Yeah, if you're someone who fades all the guys who throw super, super hard, then you shouldn't take Hunter Greene because he's one of the hardest throwers out there. If you're someone who fades pitchers who had an elbow scare and didn't get surgery, you also shouldn't take him. He did have a late season elbow scare, but he came back and pitched in multiple games. And that to me is enough to write off that as an additional injury risk. I still think he's an elevated injury risk compared to your average pitcher. But man, this is another guy who's still quite young. He's 25 years old, and he was supposed to be great, and he's already really good. That's the type of player I want to be taking in these rounds because it's the type of player who could eventually go in round 2, 3, 4, something like that. With Greene adding that splitter, like you said, really helped his home run rate. I don't know how much of it's going to hold. His home run per fly ball rate was more than cut in half from 14.3% to 6.9%. He did also lose some strikeouts, but was still at 27.7% there. So I'm pretty sure the whole profile here is still elite. I'm nervous about the injuries, but the whole package is too good to pass up on for me. I would say the same thing about my first pitcher on the list, Jack Flaherty, who has signed with the Tigers. So I am not going to be down a starting pitcher for the entire month of April in all my leagues like I was with Blake Snell last year. Jack Flaherty was incredible in the early part of last season. If you look at just his numbers from his 18 starts with the Tigers before he was dealt to the Dodgers, it was a 32% strikeout rate against a 4.6% walk rate. That added up to a 2.95 ERA and an 0.96 whip. Now, his numbers slipped back when he went to the Dodgers, but even if he just matched these numbers, I think he would still be a fine pick at his price. A 26% strikeout rate with an 8% walk rate, 3.58 ERA, I think that's fine. And again, I think he could be the guy he was with the Tigers in the early part of the season now that he's back there. The fact that Jack Flaherty was, again, supposed to be really good back in the day and was once really good. I mean, there was a time when it looked like he and Walker Buehler were maybe the aces of the next generation. It's possible we look back on Jack Flaherty's career 10 years from now and say, wow, he had a weird few years there from 2020 to 2023, but he was excellent all along. I think there really is a real chance that Jack Flaherty is drafted much higher next year. Now, there was the back issues that he dealt with some last season. There was a potential trade to the Yankees that was scrapped due to failed physical, which I believe was back related. So there's certainly some injury concerns here. And the fact that he went unsigned for so long tells me that maybe teams aren't fully convinced that he's back. But the price is not expensive. And I think you're getting a potential SP1 for SP3 prices. I'm going to be on that all day. Are you a Jack Flaherty fan as well?
I mean, it's as good of a landing spot as you could possibly have hoped for. And I looked at the NFBC ADP since I looked at it over the last week. I can't remember exactly what day it came out that he signed with the Tigers, but his ADP is unchanged so far. Maybe that's not enough of a sample to weigh that too much, but I mean, back in Detroit, and if that back holds up, obviously he passed his physical and made that signing official. So they didn't find anything in the physical with the back that was overly concerning. Great landing spot. And he didn't really change much with his repertoire last year, although I think he just eliminated a cutter, which had been terrible for him previously. It was more about mechanics, and he seems to mesh really well with Chris Fetter, the pitching coach there in Detroit. So really like Jack Flaherty, really like him at that price. I'm on board with you there. And
nice, love to hear it.
Yeah, also
your
another
next guy I'm also a fan of, right?
Yeah, We're in lockstep with Cristopher Sanchez as well. First full major league season, passed with flying colors, 3.32 ERA. His FIP was lower than that at an even 3. Elite ground ball rate, 57.4%, third highest in baseball. Kept those walks down to 5.8%, which was the 15th lowest rate in all of baseball. Strikeout rate is below average for Cristopher Sanchez last year, but he has enough volume that it doesn't really hurt you too much in that regard. I mean, between the regular season and playoffs, he got up to almost 190 innings last year. So conceivable, he could get up to 200. And if he gets to 200 innings, he can still get you 160 strikeouts. That's fine from a volume perspective. And also working on a new pitch, which we don't know what that is yet. I've seen plenty of people speculating that it's probably a cutter, and we don't know how much, if at all, it's going to help him. But it's always something fun to track during spring training. I mean, if he shows up throwing a cutter and it's a dominant pitch for him during Grapefruit League play, we could see his ADP go up a bit. So potential of a new pitch could raise his ceiling, and I think he's already got a very safe floor.
Yeah, I think he probably is adding a cutter. He said he's working on something and wouldn't say what it was, but there were reports of him working on a cutter the previous spring, and the Phillies have taught a cutter or have acquired pitchers who already knew a cutter. All of their other rotation members throw the pitch. Sanchez only threw 3 pitches last season. The Phillies tend to like guys throwing more, and they've been successful at adding pitches. I'm a huge Cristopher Sanchez fan. I think he's Framber Valdez. I think he's Max Fried. I think there's some lefty ground ball guys who keep the strikeout rate right around league average, but don't issue a lot of walks and keep it on the ground at an elite clip. And I think that works sustainably over multiple years. I'm not normally a fan of a guy with such a modest strikeout rate, but when you do those 2 other things so well, I think guys like Valdez and Fried have shown us that it can work. I think this is the last year that you're going to get Cristopher Sanchez anywhere near this price. I think he's for real, assuming he stays healthy. I think he's going to be a lot closer to the likes of Valdez and Fried next year. Definitely do not agree with this take from Uncle Ted in the chat here that Jesus Luzardo is better than Cristopher Sanchez. I mean, there's some upside with Luzardo for sure, but I think Sanchez is better already. I would take his profile, decent strikeouts, no walks, tons of grounders over what Luzardo can do, and Luzardo can't really stay on the field. So I'm a big Sanchez fan, not necessarily a big Luzardo fan. My next guy on the list here, Tanner Houck, I keep ending up with. I wonder if I was a little bit too high on him early. That's why he kept being the top pitcher on my draft board. But I don't think I'm going to really mind. Statistically, he looks quite a lot like Cristopher Sanchez if you dig under the hood just a little bit. Also an elite ground ball rate, 56% compared to 57% for Sanchez. Also avoids the walks. It was 6.5% for Houck last year. It was 5.8% for Sanchez. And also doesn't give you quite as many strikeouts as you want. 21% for him versus 20% for Sanchez. So pretty similar player from the right side. And also in not a great park, I guess you could say, in Boston and in Philly. You'd rather these guys be pitching somewhere else. But I think guys who keep it on the ground and avoid issuing too many walks and get a respectable number of strikeouts while pitching for a good team, that's the type of player that I'm pretty interested in. Do you see some upside here with Tanner Houck? Do you think he's a good addition, or are you looking at the fact that he had a 5.01 ERA and 137 WHIP 2 years ago and not so sure he's a priority target?
Yeah, I don't know about upside with Tanner Houck, but I can certainly see him at least repeating what he did last year. He really solved his splits issues. He had been destroyed by left-handed bats previously, but started throwing a splitter almost 40% of the time against lefties, and he actually was better against left-handed bats than he was righties last year, which is a complete flip of his career up to that point. So really like Andrew Bailey, their pitching coach there. I think they found those two together have found the right pitch mix. And I don't know how high the upside is because of the lack of strikeouts, but I do like Houck aside from that. Moving on to my next guy, a fellow AL East pitcher. I'm going to go to Clarke Schmidt. Awesome start. Clarke Schmidt got off to last year, 2.52 ERA, 1.14 WHIP, 67-20 strikeout to walk rate over 60 innings in his first 11 starts of the season. Then unfortunately went down with a lat strain, cost him over 3 months of action. He was not as good after returning, but I suspect he's closer to that pitcher he was early on in the year than he was later in the year. He had 3 pitches with at least a 29.7% whiff rate and a expected WOBA of under 300. His cutter solved his splits issues. Like Tanner Houck, he had issues with left-handed batters. He did not in 2024. He was just shy of 100 innings in 2024, but he had 159 innings in 2023, so I don't think we really need to worry about workload concerns. He's on a good team, and perhaps most importantly, he's going a little before pick 250, which I feel like is highway robbery getting Clarke Schmidt that late. I'm very much a believer in him, and hopefully he's put that lat issue behind him because I think he could be closer to that pitcher we saw in the first couple months last year.
Yeah, even if you look at his full season numbers last year, pretty good. I'll take a 26% strikeout rate with a league average walk rate after pick 200. It comes with some health questions, sure, but how many pitchers after pick 200 come with no health questions? The ones that do come with very little talent as well, I would say. My next guy on the list here, Yusei Kikuchi, is somebody I'm a big fan of. Talked about him with Jason Collette the other day. Somebody who was one of the best pitchers in baseball in terms of strikeout minus walk rate, 22% last year, a 28% strikeout rate versus a 6% walk rate. This is somebody who was supposed to be, on the edge of taking that next step for several years. And by that metric, he did last year. Now he also had a 4.05 ERA. So from a certain perspective, we've never actually seen Yusei Kikuchi really take off. It's a 4.05 and 3.86 ERA the last 2 seasons. But he's had a strong strikeout rate for several years now that's only increasing. He fixed his early career walk problems. He's been at 7 and 6% in that category the last 2 years. Respectable ground ball rate as well. The move to LA, the Angels, is bad for his win chances, but he's just a really fundamentally sound pitcher. He strikes out a lot of guys and walks a lot of very few guys and keeps the ball on the ground well enough. That does all the things you want at a better clip than most of the guys going in his part of the draft. So I guess the reason he's going where he is some skepticism about whether he'll do it again. He's never done exactly that before. Maybe some age-related skepticism. He'll be 34 this year. Maybe it's just to do with the team. I mean, there are reasons to doubt, but what you're doubting here is an excellent package of skills, not just a decent package of skills. And so for me, that's somebody I want to take a chance on. Are you with me on Yusei Kikuchi?
He does have that Angels stink on him now, though.
Yeah.
You feel like they could manage to get him to go backwards after he, especially with the Astros down the stretch, really took even more of a step forward. We've long been intrigued by the skill set with Yusei Kikuchi, and he hasn't always put it together over a full season, but I'm with you, especially at that price point of around 150. I think he's well worth the gamble there. One guy going much later than that, ADP after 250, Nick Lodolo. I found myself rostering a lot in early drafts. The overall numbers were not great last year, but prior to his blister and finger sprain issues, had a 2.96 ERA, 1.07 WHIP, 73-19 strikeout to walk rate in his first 70 innings. After he returned from the finger issues, he said afterward he wasn't able to grip his curveball the same way, and that's an issue because that's his biggest swing and miss pitch. So his numbers down the stretch were not as good. But if you're looking at the bright side, that's going to keep his overall numbers down and thus his price in fantasy leagues down as well. I'm not going to pretend there's not durability issues with Nick Lodolo. The 23 starts he made last year between the majors and a couple rehab starts, that's the most he's ever made as a professional. But you're also talking about a guy who has not had elbow or shoulder issues among those injury concerns. And it's a skill set that could be a legitimate fantasy ace. He does have Great American Ballpark as his home park. That's not ideal, but at that cost, I'm well on the Nick Lodolo bandwagon. I think he could pay off plenty.
Yeah, I love to hear it. I wasn't aware that there was anybody else with me still on the Nick Lodolo bandwagon, but apparently we've got you. We've got Jason Collette as well. Was talking him up on Thursday. I love a pitcher who is better than average in strikeouts, walks, and ground balls all at the same time, and that's Nick Lodolo. He's quite good at strikeouts in a typical season and slightly better than average at the other two. To me, I'll take a park risk and a durability risk at his price tag outside the top 250. Give me that every day. I think you can afford to completely lose your 253rd overall pick, and it's not going to tank your season. And if you actually get 25 starts of Nick Lodolo, could be quite good. I've got one more starting pitcher here, and am I a homer for this guy? Ranger Suarez. I don't think I normally push up too many of the Phillies, but I think the way my homerness presents itself is I'm willing to believe the late round Phillies, not all of them, but some of them. And I was willing to believe Ranger Suarez was a totally fine option last year, and that paid off great early in the season. He was one of the stories of the year. Kind of tailed off, but by the end of the season, we still got a better than average Ranger Suarez year. 3.46 ERA, 120 WHIP, a 23% strikeout rate with a 6.5% walk rate, also a 52% ground ball rate. He's a guy who doesn't do anything special in terms of strikeouts and walks, but he's always kept the ball on the ground well. That's just a solid innings eater type for a good team. I will absolutely take that as one of the final starting pitchers in my active roster. I don't think you need to make him a priority. The park's not great. He's never had a huge innings total. I don't think there's a risk of him losing a spot or anything. I guess technically, now that Andrew Painter, once Andrew Painter shows up in the second half, if somehow everybody's still healthy, that mainly we're talking Jesus Luzardo there, somebody has to move to the pen. But I don't
forget about Taijuan Walker, Erik.
True, Taijuan Walker could rebound this spring and take somebody's job, but I don't really have any meaningful worries there. I think Ranger Suarez is going to spend the entire year as a completely competent fourth starter for a good team, and I don't understand why he's so cheap. Is there something I'm missing here?
I don't think so. I mean, he's kind of Cristopher Sanchez light a little bit. I mean, there's the ground ball issues, the ground ball, not issues, the ground ball ability and lefty on the Phillies. It seems kind of weird to say because Ranger Suarez has been around a little longer than Cristopher Sanchez, but he is a little bit of a Cristopher Sanchez light who you can get many rounds later. So I'm perfectly fine with that call. This guy's going outside the top 300. My final starting pitcher, Merrill Kelly, had shoulder issues last year, limited to just 73 2/3 innings. But what I'm taking away from that from a positive is that he got off to a really good start last year. The shoulder issue popped up. He was really bad in August initially after returning from the shoulder issue, but then was awesome in September to close out the year. So that gives me good vibes that he should be healthy going into 2025. The Diamondbacks picked up his options, so they obviously are at least hopeful that he is going to enter the season healthy. And you look at the past 2 years prior to that, 3.33 ERA, 1.16 WHIP, strikeout rate of 24%, walk rate under 9% over 63 starts. It gave you a ton of volume those years. Diamondbacks were the highest scoring offense in baseball last year. He should have plenty of offensive support behind him. I mean, he's an older pitcher and doesn't have a ton of strikeout upside. I guess that's the main thing against Merrill Kelly, but that price point, basically free and going undrafted in a lot of drafts, I think there's still, tough to call it upside given his profile, but at that cost, I think he's well worth it.
Yeah, it's tough to love a 36-year-old coming off an injury-filled season, so I think that's why the price is so cheap. But because it's so cheap, if you draft him and it turns out he's just done, it's not going to hurt you too much. I think you made a good case for Merrill Kelly there. The final guy we'll talk about today, I figured I'd throw one closer out here because the closer that I've drafted the most is the closer of your St. Louis Cardinals, Ryan Helsley. I think that I'm ending up on him just because I don't want to be the first person to take a closer. I want to take one of the last closers in the first tier, and that's right about where Ryan Helsley's going. And I would be happily taking him in the middle of that tier, I think. Do you as a Cardinals fan have any reason for skepticism over Helsley, or am I right in thinking that he's pretty much just as good as Hader, Mason Miller, Edwin Diaz, Devin Williams, maybe even Clase? I don't really see him meaningfully below any of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I see no reason to doubt what he did last year was sustainable. I mean, I don't know if with the Cardinals expected to take a step back this year, if that's hurting him a little bit, but I mean, they should be good enough to generate a good number of save opportunities, and he's probably a pretty good bet to be traded at the deadline to a better team anyway. And I don't think there's any concern about him being traded and then going to a setup role. I think he's going to remain a closer wherever he potentially goes. So yeah, I think Ryan Helsley will be an elite closer again, 2025.
All right. Well, I like to hear it. That's going to do it for today's episode. We gave you 20 players that keep ending up on our teams. Would love to hear if you guys keep ending up with those same players or if you hate all of them. If this is a episode that you use as your avoid list, well, hey, then it was useful too that way. So glad you stuck around to the end. Thank you to those who hung out in the chat. Thank you, Ryan. We'll be back next week. We've got some episodes planned. We're probably going to take a look at category targets the next few weeks in some order. That's the plan. But excited to be back. It's baseball season. As soon as the Eagles win the Super Bowl, I will be fully concentrated on baseball along with everyone else in the world. Now, I am still rather nervous. We'll see how this goes. We'll see how I'm feeling for next week's show. That's going to do it today on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast presented by Fantrax.